Kriss.
You guys are the youngest successful rappers in history.
You know what I'm saying? We're like 40 years old.
We trying to have our own label.
You know what I'm saying?
A real label, you know what I'm saying?
You gotta look for that.
Like in the future.
Two street kids from Atlanta who grew up in violence and poverty suddenly became global icons overnight. In the early 1990s, when hip-hop was still considered rebellious, dangerous music, Kris Kross appeared like a storm. They toured with Michael Jackson. They became the face of MTV. They wore their clothes backwards as a hip-hop fashion symbol. They stayed at #1 on Billboard for 8 weeks straight, a milestone even many veteran rappers had never reached. But then, Kris Kross disappeared. Sudden, mysterious, with no explanation. Fans from 1992 grew up never knowing what really happened. Why did the biggest child stars on the planet suddenly vanish from the music map? Who pulled them out of the spotlight? No one knew. Only when people looked at their entire lives and careers did they realize Kris Kross didn't just disappear. They were erased, manipulated decisions, psychological collapse, addiction, death. All the truth will be revealed in this video. The final tragedy might bring you to tears. Atlanta in the late 1970s and early 1980s was not an easy place for a child to grow up. This was when unemployment in black neighborhoods was rising. Drugs were slipping into every block, and small fights broke out over a single wrong look. Chris Kelly was born on August 11, 1978 in Atlanta. He grew up with his mother, Donna Kelly Pratt, a woman who worked herself to exhaustion to keep the two of them steady through one of Atlanta's most unstable eras. With no father around, Kelly learned early how to fend for himself. While other kids had dads taking them to the field, some had nice cars or new toys. Kelly had only worn-out shoes and a faint dream of holding a microphone. But he found a second home at Greenbrier Mall, a shopping center in southwest Atlanta, where hip-hop teens gathered, where music from hi-fi stores echoed through the halls, where neon lights made everything look brighter than the reality outside. For Kelly, Greenbrier wasn't just a hiding place. It was where he felt he belonged. When Kelly was 12, his world wasn't just music anymore. It also included Chris Smith, his friend since first grade, the kid who always showed up with a laugh and mischief no one else could match. Smith was born on January 10, 1979, also raised in Atlanta, also growing up with little adult presence because his parents were busy. But he made up for it with explosive energy and a natural creative spark. Smith joined small rap battles with friends at school, scribbled lyrics in his notebook, and stood in front of the mirror imitating MC Hammer or LL Cool J. And then destiny truly found them. One afternoon in 1990, at that same Greenbrier Mall, young producer Jermaine Dupri, only 19 years old, happened to walk by and spotted the two boys standing near a pastry counter. They were joking around, posing like they were in a music video no one had filmed yet. Dupri said that when someone asked, "What are you two doing?" they answered with something so natural and cocky. "We're just being cool." In that moment, he saw what most adults would miss: star energy. Something you can't teach, can't force, can't fake. Dupri brought the boys to the studio. At that time, Kelly and Smith didn't understand the music industry contracts, or even what becoming real rappers meant. But the way they danced, laughed, and took over a small room, with nothing but pure 12 and 13-year-old energy, made Dupri nod instantly. These two have something different. Two kids swept the world, and a global hit was born. The boys discovered at Greenbrier Mall stepped into the studio with Jermaine Dupri. Everything started from a decision that made everyone think Dupri was crazy. He made the boys wear their clothes backwards. Shirts flipped pants, reversed logos turned inside out. It looked like a childish prank, yet it became the living logo of an entire generation. That image burned itself into people's minds. See backwards clothes, think Kris Kross. The bomb called Jump was detonated. In 1992, when Jump was released, no one expected two 12 and 13-year-old kids to take over the world like a storm. The song shot straight to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and stayed there. Not 1 week, not 2, but 8 straight weeks, matching the reign of pop and rock legends. This was no longer cute kids doing hip-hop. The single was certified 2x platinum by the RIAA, selling massively in the United States, Europe, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, turning Kris Kross from unknown boys into global faces in just a few months. In schoolyards across America, kids competed to wear clothes backwards. In Korea, Japan, Australia, Germany, anywhere MTV reached, you would see children trying to imitate Kelly and Smith. Backwards caps, backwards shirts, backwards pants, and that jump move that made the whole world smile because it was too cute, too natural. Kris Kross became the perfect timing of pop culture. Hip-hop was rising, MTV was becoming the king of television, and the whole world was searching for a youth icon to worship. They found it in two boys from Atlanta, totally crossed out, the teen money machine. If Jump was the bomb that shocked the world, then Totally Crossed Out was the second explosion that ripped the music industry wide open. The album didn't just debut with fireworks, it completely changed the status of the two boys. The moment it was released, the album shot straight to #1 on the Billboard 200, #1 on the R&B hip-hop albums chart, and then it just sat there towering as if challenging anyone who doubted them. When the frenzy cooled a bit, people checked the numbers again. Totally Crossed Out sold more than 4 million copies in the United States, not including international sales. Totally Crossed Out transformed Kris Kross from two kids, discovered in a shopping mall, into the hottest act in America, standing shoulder to shoulder with the biggest names of the 1990s. No one called them teen pop anymore. No one dared label them as kid artists. Kris Kross became a top act to face that appeared on every magazine cover, every talk show, every MTV channel. But the most important part happened behind the scenes. Jermaine Dupri, only 19 years old, suddenly became one of the youngest producers in history to have a multi-million selling global album. No one expected the bet on two kids wearing backwards clothes to open the door to an entire empire. Just when they were at their peak, when the album was selling like a storm, when MTV was playing them, every hour, a phone call froze the entire team. MTV 24/7, and the unbelievable invitation from the legend Michael Jackson. On MTV at the time, there was a joke among the VJs. If you don't see Kris Kross today, it's because you didn't turn on your TV. The Jump video played so constantly that kids were hooked, teens memorized it, and adults had to surrender. But MTV was only the beginning. One day in Jermaine Dupri's office, the phone rang. It was Michael Jackson's team calling. They said simply, "Michael likes the energy of the two boys. Michael wants Kris Kross to open for the Dangerous World Tour." Kelly and Smith thought they heard wrong. The entire team froze for a few seconds, then exploded. Imagine it. Two kids from Southwest Atlanta who once skipped school to hang out at the mall, who used to stand by the free pastry counter, now being invited to open for the biggest star on the planet, Michael Jackson, on the biggest stadium tour of that era. Here's something many people don't know. The Dangerous Tour, 1992, 1993, was a music monster, with 69 shows, more than 3.5 million attendees, and massive revenue. On the Europe leg in 1992, Kris Kross appeared as the official opening act. Two kids only 13 and 14 years old stepped onto a stage in front of more than 50,000 people. On their first day walking onto the Dangerous Tour stage, the roar of more than 50,000 fans hit Kelly and Smith like a bolt of electricity. They stood in bright white lights backwards, clothes, hearts racing. But when the jump beat dropped, something insane happened. The entire stadium jumped along. Not 1,000, not 10,000. More than 50,000 people jumping with two 13 and 14-year-old boys wearing backwards clothes. That was the moment Kris Kross stopped being a teen phenomenon. They became part of legend. And from that moment on, the world understood Kris Kross had touched something very few artists ever reach immortality in pop culture. Seen from the audience's angle, Kris Kross looked like they were living the perfect dream. A multi-million selling album #1 MTV video opening for Michael Jackson, money pouring in. But behind the stage, the truth was completely different and far more brutal. Money and fame became chains. The money was there, but control belonged entirely to others. The contract was signed when they were minors, and every decision lay in the hands of the label, the managers, the adults. Kelly and Smith didn't control the cash flow, didn't know who held the profits, and didn't even know how much they truly earned. They only knew they had to perform. Today film, tomorrow show up the next day. And the money, someone else handled that. Behind the scenes, nightmare. The pressure of becoming famous, too early. What Kris Kross felt the most wasn't the wealth, it was the exhaustion. people on the outside saw the spotlight. But two kids at 13 and 14 had to survive a schedule that would make even grown artists hesitate. Chris Kelly once said a sentence that sent chills down anyone who heard it. "I felt like I aged 10 years in just one summer." And he wasn't exaggerating. There were weeks when they flew to 3 countries in just 48 hours, jumping from continent to continent like machines that were never allowed to rest. Every day they had to meet 20 to 30 radio stations, answering the same questions, giving the same smiles. Waking up at 4 a.m. for makeup photo shoots, interviews, TV tapings. At night, stepping into studios or stages, rehearsing choreography, adjusting the mic, practicing their rap, then moving to another city right after midnight. There were stretches where they performed for half a year without a single real day off. And the worst part, they didn't have a childhood. Kelly began to experience stress, anxiety, and early depression. Waves of insomnia hit him. At 14, while other kids went to school, played basketball, or went on dates, Kelly and Smith were trapped in an adult schedule, forced to be professional, to be mature to shine, even when they didn't yet understand who they were. Then the dark side began to appear, not from the outside, but from what they were forced to become. After the global frenzy, Kris Kross wanted to grow up. They wanted to rap about what real 15 and 16-year-olds go through: emotions, disappointment, love, street life pressure. But the label wouldn't allow it. They were forced to maintain the same image of two kids in backwards clothes, fun, playful, harmless. No cursing, no mature topics, no stepping out from the shadow of Jump. And that was exactly what destroyed their ability to compete when hip-hop entered the era of Tupac, Biggie, Nas, Snoop, a world that was grown raw, complex. Kris Kross was stuck, not because they lacked talent, but because they weren't allowed to grow. Puberty when the body changes, but the image isn't allowed to. Kelly's voice began to crack. Smith's appearance started to change. Normal things for teenagers suddenly became problems because the label wanted them to stay as the two little boys who jump around. Meanwhile, the female fans started to appear in huge numbers, leading to endless rumors. Who was dating? Who was chasing Smith? Who sent letters to Kelly? The boys had no idea how to handle it. Any friendship with a girl instantly turned into a scandal, and the media turned on them. When they weren't cute anymore, like when they were 12 and 13, the press called them a gimmick, a trick, a group built on an image. No one cared that they were trying to change. They were only seen as two kids who were past their prime. The silent rift with Jermaine Dupri. The most painful part was their relationship with Jermaine Dupri, the man who discovered them. It wasn't a fight, it wasn't betrayal, it wasn't a scandal, it was just distance. When So Def started exploding, Dupri had to focus on new artists, Da Brat, Escape, Jagged Edge, and later, Bow Wow, a bright, marketable brand new child rapper. Dupri's schedule was packed. The studio lights were on for other people. A new Kris Kross album was no longer the #1 priority. Kelly and Smith felt like they were being set aside. No arguments needed, no scandal needed, just silence. And it broke them faster than any enemy could. The two kids who once made the whole world jump with them had to pay the price for fame that came too early. They succeeded before they could define themselves. They made money before they understood the value of money. They became famous before they were ready to face the dark side of the spotlight. And from the depths of that brilliance, their downward path began silent, brutal, and unforgiving. The collapse. A flopped album, a falling career addiction. After the magic of Totally Crossed Out, the whole world turned to Kris Kross and waited to see how they would grow up. And yes, they did grow. The boys wanted to be heard as real young men. So in 1993, they returned with Da Bomb, an album with a completely different tone. More street, more G-funk, sharper. They even brought in dancehall legend Supercat for a track. They weren't cute anymore, they were serious. But here came the cruel joke of fate. They wanted to grow up at the exact moment the market didn't want them to. The kid fans of 1992 were a year older now, and when kids grow up, they switch to Snoop Dogg. Yet hardcore hip-hop listeners would never accept the two boys from Jump suddenly talking about the streets. The press wrote lines that were half amused, half pitying Kris Kross is trying to act grown. They aren't as cute as before. Then something worse happened. A single rap line almost crushed their entire career. In the track, Da Bomb Kris Kross said, "I'm the Mac, and I'm bad." Like Michael Jackson. Unlucky timing, it was exactly when Michael Jackson was at the center of the biggest scandal of his life. Some radio stations immediately refused to play the track, afraid of being dragged into controversy. Critics called them insensitive, immature. The album crashed downhill because of one line. The label went into chaos. Jermaine Dupri was forced to adjust their direction, limiting Kris Kross from discussing any adult themes. Two 14-year-old kids were pulled into a media war they never started. The album was labeled risky. The group was seen as dated out of sync, too grown to be kids, too young to be adults. Then hip-hop evolved so fast that even the fastest artists struggled to keep up. Tupac roared with America's pain. Biggie rewrote storytelling in rap. Nas dropped Illmatic, which critics called scripture. Wu-Tang made rap harsher than steel. Jay-Z was quietly climbing into legend. Outkast put Atlanta on the map with music that was mature, eccentric, brilliant. While all of that exploded like fireworks across the hip-hop sky, Kris Kross stood on the ground, watching silently, not knowing how to rise with the rest. In 1996, they released Young, Rich and Dangerous, their best album, their most emotional, their most mature. For the first time, Kelly and Smith weren't playing characters. They were themselves. Tighter flows, deeper beats, lyrics soaked in the pain of two people who once stepped into heaven and were thrown straight back to earth. The album had a hit on the Billboard Hot 100, a single that went gold and top 20 chart performance. On its own, the album was successful. But in the enormous shadow of Jump, everything became dim. It was like bringing a beautiful flashlight into the desert, but the sun was too bright for anyone to see your light. MTV didn't play them every hour anymore. Radio didn't prioritize them. The media no longer hailed them as the future of youth culture. And for the first time, Kris Kross heard the sound every artist fears most: silence. No push, no PR, no campaigns, no label support, no Jermaine Dupri pulling the strings like he did when they were the ace card. After 1996, Kris Kross disappeared from the hip-hop sky. They returned to the studio trying to make a fourth album, bringing demos everywhere. But labels wouldn't open their doors. The market wouldn't wait. And no one believed that the kids from Jump could grow up again. The songs they wrote during this period, full of sadness and the desperate desire to be heard, were never released. They sit in old hard drives like evidence of a battle no one saw. When the two boys of Kris Kross stood on stage making America lose its mind, no one imagined that just a decade later, one would die alone, and the other would turn himself into a ghost. Chris Kelly, the dark spiral of addiction and illness. Chris Kelly used to be the heart of Kris Kross. Quick funny, the face MTV loved the most. But once the spotlight faded, he fell into what many fame experts call the deadly vacuum. When the stage lights went off, Kelly dropped straight into what specialists call the post-fame crash. The psychological breakdown that happens when someone who was once famous suddenly loses the spotlight. It's hard even for grown artists. For a child, it's almost a death sentence. Kelly began using heroin and cocaine for a long period, not to party, but to numb the feeling of failure after fame slipped away. A desperate way to escape himself. His body reacted violently. His health collapsed. He lost weight non-stop. His hair fell out in patches. His face changed so much that friends barely recognized him. He suffered severe depression, insomnia, and the haunting sense of being left behind. Family members said Kelly sometimes spoke slowly, lost focus, and there were periods when he locked himself inside the house for weeks, seeing no one. Even more heartbreaking, Jermaine Dupri tried to help. In 2013, So Def held its 20th anniversary celebration. Dupri wanted to reunite Kris Kross as a gift to the fans, and also as something for Kelly to hold on to. That night, when Kelly stepped on stage, the crowd roared like it was 1992 all over again. Under those lights, Kelly smiled, jumped and rapped like he did at 13. But the people in the industry saw what the audience couldn't. Kelly was thinner, weaker, and further from the light than ever. It wasn't the spotlight abandoning him. Kelly had been pulled away by the darkness inside him, and no one could bring him back. If Kelly was the tragedy, then Chris Daddy Mac Smith was the mystery. Chris Smith, the one who stepped out of the spotlight before it burned him. Smith is a rare case in pop history. A child who once became globally famous, but after the lights went out didn't spiral, didn't fall into addiction, didn't turn into scandal. He simply disappeared. When Kris Kross lost heat, Smith understood something Kelly couldn't accept. Fame always has an expiration date. Instead of clinging to the illusion of the past, Smith redirected himself. He withdrew from the media. No interviews, no shows, no attempted comeback. Smith went into business, built his own life, and closed the door to the public for nearly 15 years. If Kelly was abandoned by the spotlight, Smith walked away from it on his own, as if he understood fame was a double-edged sword, and that blade had been hovering over their necks since they were 12. During the 2013 reunion, Smith walked on stage next to Kelly, calm, mature, steady, like someone who had seen everything and chose the safest path to survive. Smith didn't disappear because he was weak. He disappeared because he was smart. The final tragedy. The death of Kris Kelly. On May 1, 2013, Atlanta recorded a death that shook the entire hip-hop world. That afternoon, Kris "Mac Daddy" Kelly, half of Kris Kross, was found unresponsive at home by his mother. He was rushed to Atlanta Medical Center, but at around 5 p.m., the hospital declared Kelly had passed away. The Fulton County Medical Examiner confirmed the cause of death was a mixed overdose of heroin and cocaine, a speedball tragically common in showbiz. There was no suicide note, no accusations, only a thin wallet containing an old photo of Kelly and Chris Smith as kids, the only sign he had kept that childhood close to him until the very last moment. When the news broke, the most painful reaction came from Kriss, Daddy Mac Smith. He didn't speak to the press, didn't appear in public like many artists do when tragedy strikes. Smith released only one short sentence, but it carried a lifetime of helplessness. Kriss was the brother I couldn't save. Then Smith vanished from the media for months. No interviews, no appearances, no explanations. The grief spoke for him. Kris Kross wasn't just a group. They were two boys who grew up together from first grade, and now half of that childhood was gone. The entire 90s hip-hop community immediately came together to say goodbye. Jermaine Dupri, the man who discovered them at Greenbrier Mall when they were 11 and 12, wrote, "Kris Kelly was like a son to me." LL Cool J, Ludacris, Questlove, Big Boy, Dabrat, all posted tributes. MTV Bet and Billboard dedicated segments honoring Kelly's short but iconic journey. No one talked about scandal. No one blamed anyone. No one tore him apart. Because everyone understood one thing. Kris Kelly was not just the rapper from Jump. He was the first to prove that teenage hip-hop could hit #1 on Billboard, could sell millions, could become a cultural phenomenon. Without Kris Kross, there would be no Bow Wow. Without Kris Kross, the next generation of young rappers wouldn't exist. Kelly's death didn't just end the life of a young artist. It ended an era, a time when two boys in backwards clothes made the whole world jump with them, only to grow up in a world that had no space left for the innocence they had at 12. Kris Kelly left at age 34, silent, suddenly. But he left an echo that will never fade in hip-hop history. Life today, Daddy Mac. After 30 years of glory and one devastating loss, more than 3 decades after making the whole world jump, Kris Kross is no longer a duo. One is gone. One chose to slow down. But what few people expected was this Kris Daddy Mac Smith, the boy who once stood beside Kris Kelly on every stage, kept moving forward quietly but steadily on a journey of real adulthood. Smith founded Urbane Muse, a lifestyle brand blending fashion accessories, lifestyle, and art. Step by step, he built his brand with the maturity that a 12-year-old could never have. In 2023, when no one thought Smith wanted to hold a mic again, he quietly returned to the studio. In November 2023, Smith released his first solo album, Smith Vol. 1, consisting of 7 tracks appearing on platforms like Apple Music and Spotify. It wasn't a project to jump back into the race, nor to recreate old records. It was the album of a survivor. Someone who finally found his real voice, no longer confined to the backwards clothes image. The album didn't dominate the charts, but longtime fans saw it as a confirmation that Smith was still here, older, wiser, and still loving music in his own way. Smith took the stage to honor Kelly. On September 30th, 2023, Atlanta held an event called the Live and Die for Hip Hop Celebration, honoring the life and legacy of Kris Kelly. This wasn't just a memorial. It felt like a final tribute to Kelly, the friend who walked beside him from childhood until the last days of Kris Kross. And Chris Smith was there. He performed, not to prove anything, not to regain fame, but to stand exactly where Kelly should still be standing next to him. Many fans said it was the first time they saw Smith open up about Kelly after years of silence. Today, Smith lives quietly, rarely appearing in the media. His social media presence is gentle, posting his business ventures, posting memories of Kelly, posting old Kris Kross photos. He chose a lifestyle completely opposite from the Kris Kross era, when everything was too fast, too bright, too big. Kris Kross were once two kids who shook pop culture. Now only one remains Chris Smith carrying the weight of those memories. Kris Kross is gone, but Chris Smith lives on as the last witness of that story. The legacy of Kris Kross. Why the world still jumps. 30 years later. Kris Kross did something no one thought kids could do, become a global phenomenon in hip-hop. Without them, there would be no Bow Wow, no Lil Romeo, and no later generation of teen rappers. They didn't just succeed, they opened a brand new lane for an entire segment of the music industry. The strange thing is, Kris Kross didn't just create hit songs. They created a pop culture symbol. Backwards clothes, which seemed cute and playful, became an international trend. No teen hip-hop group had ever created a global fashion wave on that scale. Jump was one of the rare rap songs that kids listened to, teens listened to, and adults listened to. It was the only rap track at that time to appear on mainstream radio playlists without any language censorship. Kris Kross made hip-hop feel safe, fun, and bursting with energy. And that became the gateway that brought millions of mainstream fans into rap. They were only active at the top for a few years, but the impact lasted 3 decades. If their career had been longer, maybe the legacy would look different. But it was exactly that short, explosive burst, like a flash of fireworks, that made Kris Kross the eternal symbol of youth. Did you ever jump to Jump when you were a kid? What do you think is the biggest legacy of Kris Kross? Like the video to support the journey of retelling these legends. And subscribe so you don't miss any story about the people who shaped an entire era.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore. Stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on the screen.